Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is Friday, August 19th, 2022. August 19th, 2022. So it's been a while, and we've got a lot to cover. So let's go to our first story, which is out of Eerie News, and it's titled Man Claims He Was Offered as a Sacrifice at Pachamama Festival in Bolivia. A 30-year-old man claims he was buried alive as part of a sacrifice on Earth Day. Victor Hugo Mica Alvarez, 30, described where he had been attending a Mother Earth festival being celebrated on August 1st, 2022 in Bolivia, where people gathered at dawn for a ritual to Pachamama, also known as Madre Tierra. He lives in Chile and came to Villa Victoria to attend the festivities and perform with a group he belongs to that represent Toba's dance. This is a folkloric dance that dates back to the Incas. The Pachamama festival is celebrated by indigenous people where offerings are made to the goddess in the form of sacrifices ranging from live animals, sheep fetus, desiccated llamas, eggs, minerals, to coca leaves and sweets. They believe she opens her mouth for these offerings. This ceremony is especially important to those who are involved in agriculture. He said he met a friend at the festival celebrated in El Alto, Bolivia. The friend invited him to drink some beer. He was dancing and drinking and then claims he couldn't remember anything else until he woke up inside the coffin. He later described to local media that he dreamt he was in his bed and he felt the need to urinate, but as he came to, he realized he couldn't move. He awoke and found himself inside a coffin with a partial glass lid. Alvarez said, "When I pushed the coffin, I was able to break a glass that it had, and that way I was able to get out. When I pushed the coffin, I barely broke the glass, and through the glass, dirt began to enter. They wanted to use me as a Sulu. This word is derived from the Quechua language and means fetus. The term Sulu refers to any offerings commonly made to give back to Mother Earth or Pachamama throughout August in Bolivia. The place he was buried was in Achicala, 50 miles from El Alto. Alex Magnin, a young man who found him wandering around Ceja de El Alto after he got out, said he was covered with dried mud and cement. His hand was also cut and bleeding. Mica Alvarez claims he was a human sacrifice that some fear are still offered as they were in ancient times to satisfy Pachamama. Mica Alvarez told police, but they refused to believe him, telling him he was too drunk to know how he ended up buried in a coffin and to come back when he was healthy. His mother, Lydia A., was interviewed by Urgente Bowl, where she claims her son was being sacrificed by being buried under a structure that was under construction. She said her son is traumatized and has problems sleeping. She believes his drink was drugged. When asked why he thought he was being sacrificed, Miguel Alvarez said he was buried next to a building under construction and that according to certain Aymara tradition, Pachamama demands an offering of a human life so the building will be strong and prosperous. This, coupled with the timing in which August in Bolivia is a very important month for the indigenous people where offerings are made to Madre Tierra. An Amata leader, Juan Carlos Balón, was asked which are the best days to give offerings to Pachamama. He said the best days are Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday, but especially Thursday, since among their people it is known as a day of the rays. Worship of Pachamama predates the arrival of Europeans and was adopted by the Incas in their traditions from the Shavan. The culture developed in the northern Andean highlands of Peru and adjacent areas of Bolivia from 900 to 200 BC. I have heard in ancient times that that belief where either a human or an animal was buried in the like basically when the structure was being built, whether it was a house or even a building, just for either as a house spirit, a bunch of stuff. That's incredible to think, that might still be going on. Interesting. All right, moving on to the next story. By the way, in the background, yes, that's one of my crazy parrots. This is out of Mysterious Universe, and it's titled, "Do Dangerous Creatures Live Deep Below the Surface of Our World?" And they just might. Let's see what's there. Um, are there strange and sinister creatures living deep below the surface of our world and inside our mountains? We shouldn't dismiss such a possibility. We begin with someone who spent a lot of time addressing this very issue, the late writer-researcher Mac Tonnies. Tanis was not just known and respected for his work in the field of Martian anomalies, he also had a deep interest in the field of what he personally termed the cryptoterrestrials. It's a term he coined in the early 2000s when his research into this particular arena began. For Tanis, the cryptoterrestrials fell into two clearly delineated groups. In essence, it goes like this. For Tanis, at least, some UFO encounters and incidents, and particularly so alien abductions, were not the work of extraterrestrials. Rather, they were the work of an extremely ancient race of humanoids that developed alongside us, but who chose to stay away from us, aside from when they needed certain things from us. Those certain things being our DNA, cells, eggs, sperm, and so on, due to the fact that their civilization today is degrading and decaying and requires new blood. So they use us to beef up their race, at least to the extent that they are able to do so. In his 1997 book, Remote Viewers, Jim Schnabel told the story of the U.S. intelligence community's involvement in the controversial issue of psychic spying that largely began in the early to mid-1970s. Commenting on the skills of a talented remote viewer in relation to matters of a UFO nature, one Pat Price, Schnabel noted Price was of the opinion that, quote, Alaska's Mount Hayes, the jewel of a glacial range northeast of Anchorage, housed one of the aliens' largest bases. According to Pat Price, the aliens that lived deep inside Mount Hayes were very human-looking, differing only in their heart, lungs, blood, and eyes. Ominously, he added that the aliens used thought transfer for motor control of us. Price added, the site has also been responsible for strange activity and malfunction of U.S. and Soviet space objects. Now, onto the matter of cryptozoology. Perhaps the most terrifying of all monsters are those that we know exist, and when they are right under our feet, as in literally, they become even more fear-inducing. Take, for example, the alligators of New York. We're talking about those immense, bone-crunching beasts that lurk deep within the myriad, winding sewers and subways beneath the Big Apple. Most people assume that the stories of New York's people-eating alligators are nothing more than the stuff of myth and urban legend. The stark truth is they could not be further from the truth. Proof that alligators have been on the loose in the city for decades was provided way back in February of 1935 by none other than the New York Times. The story was spelled out in an article titled Alligator Found in Uptown Sewer. Youth shoveling snow see the animal churning in icy water. As the newspaper noted, the gang of boys led by Salvatore Condolucci actually managed to capture the approximately 7-foot-long animal and beat and stabbed it to death after it was seen lurking in the sewers on 123rd Street, close to the Harlem River. For more than 3 decades, Teddy May was the commissioner of sewers in New York. He had gone on record as stating that he heard tales of alligators roaming the sewers of the city as far back as the 1930s, the same time frame in which the New York Times reported on the violent encounter at 123rd Street. May conceded that he took little interest in the report since he felt it was all a case of folklore and legend, and certainly not reality. Stories of strange creatures, many of a definitely cryptozoological nature, lurking in the London underground have circulated for years, and chiefly in fictional on-screen format. Such examples include A, the 1967 production of Quatermass and the Pit, in which bizarre mutated and diminutive ape men, who were the subject of advanced genetic experiments undertaken millions of years earlier by visiting Martians, appear in the London underground of the 1960s in the form of spectral, manifested inherited memories. B, The Web of Fear, a Doctor Who adventure that surfaced in the following year, 1968, that sees the Doctor and his comrades doing battle with robotic yetis on the underground. C, An American Werewolf in London, a 1981 film in which the beast of the title feasts on the doomed late-night rail traveler. And D, Reign of Fire, a 2002 production starring Christian Bale and Matthew McConaughey that revolves around literal fire-breathing dragons burst forth from the old tunnels of the underground and decimate Britain and eventually the rest of the planet too. Some of the older tales of creatures like entities prowling the tunnels under London were incorporated into a less well-known fictionalized film. Its name was Deathline. Made in 1972, it starred horror film stalwarts Christopher Lee and Donald Pleasance, and related the saga of a collapse in the latter part of the 19th century at a then new station being built at Russell Square, which happens to be a real station on the underground. Unfortunately, when the disaster occurs, a significant number of workers, both men and women, are killed, or rather they are presumed killed, and when the company funding the project goes bankrupt, All efforts to try and dig out the bodies and give them a decent burial are quickly, quietly, and conveniently forgotten. There is a reason why I mention these fictional stories. For years, there have been tales of subterranean humanoids lurking deep below London. True or not, the stories are fascinating. Now, on to Bigfoot and similar beasts. In the latter part of the 19th century, a British adventurer and explorer named Hugh Neville was told of a race of creatures that were part human and part ape, but which were by the time Neville heard the story dead and gone, somewhere in the vicinity of 5 human generations earlier. They resided in the southeast corner of Sri Lanka, and before their assumed extinction, were constantly at war with another race of hairy humanoids known as the Nitawo. Both types of creatures were fairly small, around 4 to 5 feet in height. They also shared a liking for living in deep natural caves and caverns, and had a love of fresh raw meat. They were not totally savage, however, as it is evidenced by their apparent use of primitive stone tools. It was not their constant warring with each other that wiped out the Nitawo and their unnamed furry foes. However, it was man. Reportedly, the last of the Nitawos were killed in a violent confrontation at a cave in the Katarogama Hills. One of the most thought-provoking theories for Bigfoot, overwhelming elusiveness, suggests that the creature spends a great deal of time living in natural caves and caverns, as well as abandoned old mines. We're talking about the deep and dark world of Bigfoot. In the early 1900s, a number of stories surfaced in the Oregon press that, upon careful reflection, just might offer a degree of support for this particularly intriguing theory that Bigfoot is very much a creature of the underground. The reports are made all the more significant because they reference an excess of a decade of sightings of large, hairy creature, all in a specific vicinity where underground digging was known to be widespread. In 1900, the Curry County, Oregon newspaper reported on an amazing story. The Sixes mining district in Curry County has, for the past 30 years, glorified in the exclusive possession of a kangaroo man. Recently, while William Page and Johnny McCullough were mining there when out hunting, McCullough saw the strange animal man come down a stream to drink. Excuse me. Excuse me. In calling Page's attention to the strange being, it became frightened, and with cat-like agility, which has always been a leading characteristic, with a few bounds was out of sight. Dreaded wild men strike fear into Indian children was the eye-catching title of an article that jumped out of the pages on the March 3, 1934 edition of the Lethbridge Herald newspaper, which uncovered the Lethbridge area of Alberta, Canada. The story was of a fascinating one. It gave that it focused on the often reported possibility that the Bigfoot creatures are able to remain out of harm's way and detection by living in underground realms, such as ancient caverns and incredibly deep cave systems. The articles began by stating, hold on, here I lost my place here. Here we go. The article began by stating that Native American children in the vicinity of Harrison Mills, British Columbia, had been warned to stay close to their mothers' apron strings, for this fearsome Sasquatch had returned to spread terror through peace-loving Chehalis tribes. It was noted that although reports of the much-feared creature were all the rage in the area some 3 decades earlier, this was the first time since 1914 that they had not been seen on the prowl. So, yeah, the reason why I'm stopping is that I'm thinking, I think regardless of cultures, all parents or caretakers come down to the boogeyman is going to get you when you're like ready to pull your hair out and you can't get your kid to calm down. And it's like, you better be good or the blank, blank, blank is going to come and get you. It appeared that the first most recent encounter came from a man named Frank Dan. The Lethbridge Herald captivated its readers with the details of the uncanny event. Investigating the persistent barking of his dog at night, Dan came face to face with a hairy giant who, according to Dan, was tall and muscular, prowling in the nude. He was covered in black hair from head to foot except for a small space around the eyes. Dan ran breathlessly into his house and secured the door. Peeking through the window, he saw the giant stride leisurely into the nearby bush and disappear. The writer of this article noted something very interesting. The Indians say the Sasquatch dwell in caves and subterranean caverns on the borders of lakes in the mountain vastness. Many strange tales are told of the appearance of the elusive people. And of course, everybody's very familiar also with the theory that not only that, but they're just really, really good at camouflage. In other words, that you could be right next to them and you will not see them because you're thinking that, in other words, that saying that you see what you expect to see, something along those lines. So, and finally, there is the notorious Dulce base that is said to be below the surface of New Mexico. Dulce is a pleasant and inviting town that is situated in New Mexico's Rio Arriba County. It's a small town of less than 3,000 people and which is around 13 square miles in size. It was founded in the latter part of the 19th century and today is the home of the Jicarilla Apache Nation. There is nothing particularly unusual or out of the ordinary about Dulce, at least not at first glance. Look a little bit closer, though, and you'll find yourself in a world filled with dark secrets and terrifying tales of the cosmic and conspiratorial kind. And by closer, I mean below your feet, way below your feet, maybe even miles down. Since the late 1970s, rumors have swirled to the effect that deep within the massive Archuleta Mesa, which dominates the town, there is a secret and futuristic facility that has been out of bounds to the U.S. government since 1979. Today, it is said that the installation is under the complete control of hostile and deadly extraterrestrials, the so-called Greys of UFO lore, those dwarfish, black-eyed, large-headed entities that are practically part of popular culture. So the story goes, it was in 1979 that a violent confrontation between military personnel and the aliens broke out. And we were the losers. The base, which was once a hub of human/alien interaction, is now theirs. And theirs alone. Witnesses talk of people going missing in vast cavern-like rooms in which people are devoured by voraciously hungry aliens. Are the tales true? How did the rumors begin? The questions are still being asked. Are there mysterious and perhaps deadly creatures below the surface of our planet? Don't dismiss such things. And it always circles back, especially when we're talking about extraterrestrials, as in extraterrestrials, like you know, friendly or not, or indifferent, or the worst case of unfriendly being that they feed on us. In other words, I mean, it would be bad enough to think that that we're being what's the word, harvested, let's say, from genetic materials, which I know is one of the theories out there. But I think the one that really strikes terror into everybody is that we're on the menu, literally. So there you go. Okay, we're back now to the next article. This is out of Eerie News, and it's titled "The Fate of the U.S.S. Cyclops, One of the Sea's Most Enduring Mysteries." In a foreshadowing of things to come in early March of 1918, it was reported by the Navy that Willie J. Nettles, coxswain on the U.S.S. Cyclops, was drowned in February 10th when he was swept overboard. His body was never recovered from the waters off Brazil. The U.S.S. Cyclops was the biggest ship in the U.S. Navy. Powered by steam, she was 550 feet long, and since 1910, she traveled between the Caribbean, Mexico, and the Baltic Sea, moving coal and refugees from port to port. In 1917, due to World War I, she transported troops and coal to fuel ships around the world. In February 1918, she left Rio de Janeiro loaded with tons of dense manganese ore. 2 days later, she stopped at Salvador, Brazil. On February 22nd, the ship left for Baltimore with no stops planned. However, the Cyclops docked in Barbados because the water level was over the Plimsoll line, used to indicate if a ship is overloaded. When she left Brazil, it was thought the ship was overloaded, and before leaving for Baltimore, Commander Worley reported the starboard engine was not operating due to a cracked cylinder. The survey board recommended that repairs would be made when the vessel returned to the United States. On March 3rd, a telegram was sent to the West Indian Steamship Company in New York City. Quote, advised charterers U.S.S. Cyclops arrived Barbados. 3 March for bunkers. Expect to arrive Baltimore 13 March. The next day, the collier departed Barbados. No distress call was ever received. The last message was, weather fair, all well. This was the last ever heard of the Cyclops. Later investigations completed in Rio de Janeiro confirmed the ship was properly loaded and secured, but conflicting reports found that Captain Worley left inexperienced crew to load the ship while in Brazil. Initially, the Navy denied that the vessel had disappeared, But less than 30 days later, the news story had become more grim. It seemed the U.S.S. Cyclops, is a naval collier, could not be located. By the end of April, hopes were fading the vessel could be found, or at least an explanation of what happened. President Woodrow Wilson announced, "Only God and the sea knows what happened to the great ship." The Navy sent in personnel to question fishermen along the coast of the West Indian Islands along the route taken by the ship 2 months before when she sailed from Barbados, hoping they could provide a clue. Ships scoured the waters the Cyclops would have taken, and no trace of wreckage was found. The thought was that she had been captured or sunk by a German submarine or raider. The ore she carried could be used to produce munitions. The German authorities then and after the war denied any knowledge of having intercepted the Cyclops. There were 57 passengers, mostly Navy personnel, 5 prisoners, 21 officers, and a crew of 230. The total number lost has been estimated from 297 to 309. Between March 9th and 10th, a storm covered the Virginia Capes area. Captain E.C. Hilliard, the captain of the Amalco, sighted the Cyclops on March 9, 1918. He later told the Navy, "If I had been carrying manganese ore, I could not have survived the gale." This report was discounted since it was estimated that since the Cyclops was not expected in Baltimore until March 13th, it could not have been in the waters off Virginia on March 9th. Questions abounded. However, there were no answers. Did her cargo break? The Cyclops in two. Did her cargo shift and capsize her? Was she sunk by an internal explosion? Was she sunk by a submarine or a mine? Was she captured by the Germans? Was she surrendered through treachery? Or was she spurlos versenkt, sunk without a trace? In the months that followed, without proof of her fate, the Navy stated, "Many theories have been advanced, but none that satisfactorily accounts for her disappearance." On June the 1st, 1918, the ship was declared officially lost with all hands. Strangely, her sister ships eventually shared the same fate, 3 of them in the same year. The U.S.S. Proteus became part of the Canadian Merchant Navy in 1941 and was lost at sea 7 months after, while she traversed the Caribbean Sea. A crew of 50 went down with her, and the ship has never been found. The U.S.S. Narration was sold to the Aluminum Company of Canada in 1941 and was lost 10 months later after she departed the U.S. Virgin Islands with a load of bauxite ore. The wreck has never been located. She was following the same route as the Cyclops. Their loss was blamed on catastrophic structural failure. The Cyclops in these 2 sister ships disappeared while traversing the Bermuda Triangle. The 4th collier of the group, the U.S.S. Jupiter, was converted in 1920 into the U.S. Navy's first aircraft carrier and was renamed the U.S.S. Langley. She was later converted into a seaplane tender and was finally sunk by Japanese aircraft in the Battle of the Java Sea in 1942, within months of the loss of the Proteus and the Nereus. Most of the survivors were transferred to another ship, the U.S.S. Pescos, and this was also later bombed and sunk, with the Japanese machine gunning the survivors in the water. I feel bad for those poor sailors. They got off one ship, and they might have met their end anyway on the U.S.S. Pecos. After the Proteus and Nereus were lost, the disappearance of the Cyclops is now theorized to also be a result of structural failure, where the I-beams that ran the length of the ship eroded due to the contents of her cargo. However, unless her wreck is ever found, this could not be confirmed. During the investigation of the Cyclops, her captain, Lieutenant Commander George W. Worley, came under scrutiny. And with good reason, by the way. He was born John Frederick Weichmann in Germany in 1862. He jumped ship in San Francisco in 1878. 20 years later, he changed his surname to Worley, and he ran a saloon on the Barbary Coast. By then, some of his brothers had also immigrated. He gained a qualification as a ship's master and commanded several merchant ships, transporting cargo, some legal, and it was rumored that when he voyaged to the Far East, he brought opium back. Worley developed a reputation as being a harsh captain that brutalized and berated his crew, including officers, for minimal transgressions. On February 21st, 1917, he was commissioned as a lieutenant commander in the Naval Auxiliary Reserve. Later it was determined he would leave inexperienced men to oversee the loading of the cargo. Whether deserved or not, there were those who suspected he was a German sympathizer. Prior to the declaration the Cyclops had been lost, Worley's wife, Selma, visited newspaper offices requesting the suppression of an interview she had given about her husband's change of name and his birth in Germany. She said he came as a child and changed his name to honor his foster father. However, he was 16 years old when he came to the United States. He changed his surname in Washington prior to entering the Navy. Her sister-in-law, Anna M. Angerman, confirmed to newspapers their family name was Wickman. This information prompted an investigation by the Navy, which examined Worley's records, where he listed San Francisco as his birthplace. There was a brother, Herman Wickman, who never altered his surname. Near the time the Cyclops was called off, a telegram was received by the State Department from Charles Ludlow Livingston, the U.S. consul on Barbados, and it read thus: Secretary of State, Washington, D.C., April 17th. Departments 15th. Confidential. Master Cyclops stated that required 600 tons coal having sufficient on board to reach Bermuda. Engines very poor condition, not sufficient funds, and therefore requested payments by me. Unusually reticent. I have a certainty he took here ton fresh meat, ton flour, 1,000 pounds vegetables, paying there $775. From different sources gather the following. He had plenty of coal, alleged inferior, took coal to mix, probably had more than 1,500 tons. Master alluded to by others as damned, the master, by the way, they're referring to the captain of the ship. Master alluded to the others as damned Dutchman, apparently disliked by other officers. Rumored disturbances en route hither, men confined and one executed. Also had some prisoners from the fleet in Brazilian waters. One life sentence. United States Consul General Gottschalk, passenger. 231 crew exclusive of officers and passengers. Have names of crew but not of all the officers and passengers. Many Germanic names appear. Number, telegraphic or wireless message addressed to master or in care of ship were delivered at this port. All telegrams for Barbados on file had office St. Thomas. I have to suggest scrutiny there. While not having any definite grounds, I fear fate worse than sinking, though possibly based on instinctive dislike felt towards master. Okay, in other words, this Mr. Livingston, the consul in Barbados, he's telling them, first of all, supposedly when the Cyclops left Brazil, they were not going to stop in Barbados. They were heading straight to Baltimore. And supposedly the reason why, and by the way, they already knew that one of the engines was in bad shape. All right. And now another thing, these ships were steam powered, which is why they need the coal and other things to generate fuel, basically. But my point being, and I think this is what he was trying to get to, the stop in Barbados was not planned. And supposedly it was because it showed that she was overloaded because of the Plimsoll line. But he's referring here that the captain received messages from St. Thomas, which is, how would anybody know to send him anything to Barbados if he wasn't supposed to make a stop there? That's like a little weird thing that went on there. Anyway, let's keep going. The letter dated December 31st, 1917 was written at the YMCA located in Norfolk Navy Yard prior to the ship leaving on its last voyage. It was written by Edward Scott Morgan, Jr., age 23. His mother, Ida, passed away in September 1919 at the age of 53. Perhaps the heartbreak was too much. He'd already lost a daughter in age 1891, age 8 from croup. I'm not going to read you the letter. Just go into Eerie News and to the story, and you can read it. It's kind of like a heartbreaking because it's just a sailor. This is December of 1917. This is like maybe a little over a month before this ship is lost. And he's reading this real sweet letter to his mother and his family. Anyway, then keep going. In January of 1922, the Greensboro Daily News described that within 2 weeks after the Cyclops sailed, and at least a month before she was reported as missing, a notice appeared in Rio de Janeiro newspaper stating that a requiem mass would be celebrated for the American Consul General, quote, lost at sea in the American collier Cyclops. Americans in Brazil questioned the announcement and inquired about it. However, the newspaper in question disclaimed any knowledge of the person who had inserted the notice. American Secret Service agents tried to trace the clue of the newspaper clipping, but by then it was too late. The man who brought it for publication had disappeared. Point being, how could you put an announcement for a requiem mass when it took the Navy about a month to basically declare that the ship was lost, and they placed that notice like 2 weeks later? Anyway, this fed into the theory that one of the Cyclops passengers, Alfred Louis Moreau Gottschalk, American consul general at Rio de Janeiro, was instrumental in, quote, stirring up sentiment throughout Brazil in favor of the Allied forces, end quote. Anonymous messages were made threatening his life prior to his return to the U.S. There was also the belief that if not sunk by the Germans, she was taken in order to use her large cargo of manganese. After signing of the armistice, American authorities examined all naval German records, and there was no reference to the Cyclops. The only exception to this theory was that the ship was sunk by a submarine who itself failed to return to port. It was also noted that among the ships that had disappeared in those years, the Cyclops was the only one equipped with wireless. In 1920, by wireless they mean telegraph or telegram capability. In 1922, a supposed message in a bottle from a member of the Cyclops washed up on the North Carolina coast. It was found near where the Carol A. Deering was last seen before she beached on Diamond Shoals. The Navy investigated, and it was discredited when it turned out the message was found in an island off the coast of Washington and supposedly emanated from Japanese sources. This was not the first time a message in a bottle was discovered. There was a report from August 1918 when another message in a bottle washed ashore at Quarantine Island at the entrance to Baltimore Harbor. The message, written in a hurried hand, read, quote, "Our collier Cyclops captured by German submarine off Virginia coast." This was not the end of these discoveries. In October 1926, another message scratched on a scroll of birch bark was found in a sealed bottle, entangled in a heap of seaweed, on the coast of Massachusetts. Its sealed cap was oxidized from exposure. It read, "SS Cyclops is sinking, 161 men on board, 10 degrees 6 minutes, 10 degrees 40 minutes, GP Arm USN." Part of the message was indecipherable. However, it was noted that among the roster of the missing crew, there were two names resembling the scrawled signature. One was George Jones Arminger and the other Robert Armstrong. According to Numa, in 1968, Master Navy diver Dean Hawes found a large wreck in 180 feet of water, about 40 miles northeast of Cape Charles, while he was searching for a lost submarine named the Scorpion. He surfaced with the intention of returning with a dive team, but bad weather forced him to abandon the endeavor and return to Norfolk. The Scorpion was located near the Azores, and the Navy decided not to return where a solitary buoy had been left to mark Hawes' discovery. Dean Hawes returned years later, and by then he had compared a picture of the Cyclops to what he had seen, and he believed they were the same ship. On that trip, they found a different wreck, not the Cyclops. Hawes believed that due to the storm and operating only on one engine, the ship went off course and ended up northeast of the entrance to Chesapeake Bay. Dean Hawes has since passed away. In 1931, the Brooklyn Daily printed a story titled "Sabotage on Cyclops Before Fatal Voyage Bared by Ex-Officer." Henry Charles Ryder, originally from Brooklyn, was once an ensign engineer on the Cyclops up to the evening before her last voyage. The day before the Cyclops left from Norfolk for Rio de Janeiro, Ryder was transferred to the U.S.S. Azama and escaped the fate of his shipmates. When he came to the Kings County American Legion seeking employment, he told the story of mysterious happenings on the ship. He believed the ship was deliberately sunk by German agents who destroyed all flotsam. The soft-spoken Ryder was allegedly pressed to tell a story of strange signal lights and intrigue. Here he told of a prior voyage from France to New York. And this is what he described. There was a general spirit of uneasiness among the crew. There was talk of 5 German spies being on board. Suspicion was rampant, the more disturbing because nothing could be found at first which seemed to warrant it. Then came the direct evidence. One day, the rope hoists of a lifeboat were found cleanly cut. A quick inspection of the hoist of the other lifeboat hoist was made. Every one of them had been cut clean with a keen blade. The lifeboats had been rendered virtually useless in an emergency. There was a quiet investigation. It never was learned who was responsible, but the feeling of unrest among the crew was intensified. From New York, we went up to Halifax. Suspicion began to center on several men. One of them was in my gang in the engine room. It was reported to me that this man had been seen with a sledgehammer near one of the valves. From that time on, I kept him on extra hours of duty and remained on duty myself until we were both physically exhausted so that I could keep him constantly under my eye. On the way back from Halifax to New York, one of the officers discovered that a light had been run up on the mainmast. Further investigation disclosed wires and a key. The lamp had been rigged as a blinker signal. Again, investigation failed to disclose who was responsible. Of course, it was wartime and we were running without lights. Then one night, Ensign Roy T. Smith, on duty on the bridge, saw light flashing from the quarters of the medical officers aft on the starboard. He told me it appeared to be a pocket of flashlight and was being used to signal. Fearing a reprimand if he left his post on the bridge, to make an immediate investigation for getting aft on the Cyclops was no simple matter. He did not report it to the captain until he went off duty in the morning. The result was another fruitless inquiry. If she had merely foundered and sunk, there would have been wreckage of some kind adrift or washed ashore during all these years. What became of the life rafts? What became of all the other things that would have floated? The water pressure undersea alone would have been sufficient to tear the lifeboats loose. Fragments, at least, of the battered boats would have come to the surface. It is my belief that the plotters had ample time to destroy all traces. It is possible, I merely offered as a possibility, that they succeeded in poisoning the food of all on board, and then jammed everything that would float in the hold of the collier before they sank her. It is also possible that they scuttled or blew up the ship, escaped to a German vessel with whom they had been in signal communication, and after the destruction of the Cyclops, painstakingly destroyed all floating wreckage. That was the end of his description. The same article described where a year before, a former Marine sergeant said that a man with whom he chanced to room in Texas had left behind a diary. The entries told of a story of how the writer, along with 4 other men, packed dynamite around the engine of the Cyclops, with plans to escape to a waiting German vessel. Only 2 of them made it. The writer of the diary, who was supposed to be a chance acquaintance of the Marine, was never found. The news story went on to describe that Lieutenant James M. Hayes, navigating officer on the collier Orion, a month after the Cyclops was lost, sighted a life preserver and raft which he suspected belonged to the Cyclops. He reported to the captain, but he refused to put the ship off her course to pick up what Hayes had seen. In February of 1920, Donald Fraser, a Chicagoan, reported that on Gun Key in the Bahamas, he had found fragments of a lifeboat with the U.S. Cyclops stenciled on it. He also described a sunken hull of a ship 2,000 yards off the key. The Navy never found the wreckage. Quote, not a bit of the wreckage, nor this was printed in the Santa Fe magazine in 1920. Not a bit of the wreckage nor sign of any description has been found. Usually a wooden bucket or a cork life preserver identified as belonging to the lost ship is picked up after a wreck, but not so with the Cyclops. She just disappeared as though some gigantic monster of the sea had grabbed her, men and all, and sent her into the depths of the ocean. And the sadness of her destruction is amplified by the absence of any wireless calls for help being picked up by any ship along the route that the Cyclops followed. Now, another interesting thing is on the Cyclops, they were transporting prisoners. On December 1917, Oscar Stewart, age 17, a third-class fireman, was murdered as a result of an altercation on the armored cruiser U.S.S. Pittsburgh while at anchor with the South American squadron off the coast of Brazil. He was found in a pool of blood in one of the boiler rooms. Court-martialed for the offense were Bernard DeVoe, Moss Whiteside, and James Coker. Whiteside received 15 years, DeVoe life in prison, and Coker death. With the exception of Coker, the others, including 2 deserters, were taken aboard the Cyclops as passengers, albeit in irons, bound for the brig at Portsmouth, New Hampshire. U.S. Consul to Barbados C. Ludlow Livingston hinted in his letter that one of these men may have been executed on Worley's orders before they reached Barbados. It's unknown if this person was Coker, since his name does not appear on any of the Cyclops lists. In addition to the prisoners, 42 men from the Pittsburgh were sent stateside on the Cyclops for reassignment. After the loss of the Cyclops, a rumor circulated, one of many, that some of the men from the Pittsburgh were said to be friends of those convicted in connection with the murder. James Coker would be transferred to the Cyclops for his execution. Their friends would mutiny to free his accomplices. The crew would mutiny to free Lieutenant Harvey Forbes, with a captain known as the Damned Dutchman, who was going insane, losing command of the ship. Yeah, because this guy, the Captain Worley, known as a.k.a. the Damned Dutchman, was known to walk around his underwears with his cane. Some people say maybe he was crazy or maybe it was just really hot in the tropics, who knows. Whether these rumors were grounded in truth will never be known, as all those who would say otherwise took their truth, secrets, and regrets to their watery grave. Perhaps the Cyclops was cursed along with her sister ships, or claimed by a mysterious force that exists between those 3 points of the Devil's Triangle. Although the ship disappeared on March 4th, 1918, the designated date of death for everyone on board is June 14, 1918. The loss of the Cyclops is often described as the single largest loss of U.S. Navy lives not directly involving combat. There you go. Next, and by the way, I'm surprised I still haven't located it, because now I know that there's a lot of radar, there's a lot of new technology that's located a lot of ships that were lost, even things from 3, 4, 500 years. Let's see if we get a surprise one of these days and they locate the Cyclops. All right, the next article is out of Ancient Origins, and it's titled Lady of Dai Mummy is so well preserved that blood remains in her veins. The 2,200-year-old mummified body of a Chinese woman known as Zhu, or the Lady of Dai, is an anomaly. When her body was discovered, it was so incredibly well preserved that it equaled that of someone recently deceased. And that also puts into question. Sometimes we only think of mummification as being like an Egyptian tradition. Obviously, it wasn't. Okay, Zingzui, the Lady of Dai, died between 178 and 145 BC at around 50 years of age. The objects inside her tomb indicated a woman of wealth and importance. In 1971, her Han Dynasty era tomb was discovered accidentally by workers digging an air raid shelter. When her body was first examined, her skin was still moist and elastic, her joints still flexible. Every feature remained intact down to her eyelashes and the hair in her nostrils. Even the blood still remained in her veins. Pathologists found 138 undigested melon seeds in her esophagus, stomach, and intestines. She had eaten the melon just 1 hour before her death. Her organs were still intact, even down to the lung vagus nerve, which is as thin as hair. Blood clots were found in her veins, and evidence was found of a coronary heart attack, as well as a host of other ailments and diseases such as diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, liver disease, and gallstones. The lady died of a heart attack at the age of 50, brought on by obesity, lack of exercise, and an overindulgent diet. The Lady of Dai is one of the best preserved mummies ever found. The condition is owed to the fact that her body had been swaddled in 20 layers of silk, and she was found in 80 liters of an unknown liquid that was mildly acidic with some magnesium in it. She was placed within 4 layers of coffins, which were within an airtight, clay-lined burial vault, 12 meters underground. The Lady of Dai's body has now deteriorated due to exposure to oxygen, but nevertheless remains in reasonable condition, where it is housed in the Hunan Provincial Museum. That is incredible. Okay, let's go on to the next story. I thought this was really interesting. This is out of Oddity Central, and it's titled, You Can Buy a Husband at India's 700-Year-Old Groom Market. For over 700 years, the Indian state of Bihar has been hosting a unique groom market where women and their families come to shop for husbands. Every year, thousands of men gather under the pipal tree in the local market area of Madhubani district, India's Bihar state, and wait to be chosen by prospective brides. Called Surath Mela or Sabhagachi, the 9-day groom market was allegedly started by Raja Hari Singh of the Karnat dynasty over 7 centuries ago to make it easier for women to find the right husband from a diverse group of men. Each groom is priced based on their capability, including their educational qualifications and family background. Imagine going to a market to pick up your life partner. That sounds crazy, especially in this day and age, but it's exactly how some Maithili women in Bihar choose their husbands. Accompanied by their families, they browse the available offers, ask for proof such as birth certificates and school certificates, and if they find someone they like and they can afford, they start discussing the details. Al Jazeera recently documented Bihar's traditional groom market, reporting that engineers, doctors, and government employees are most sought after, with the young ones being the most popular. Even though dowries are officially illegal in India, and that one of the main goals of the groom market was to eliminate the dowry, it is still common practice for young, eligible bachelors to demand considerable dowries from the family of the bride. Apparently, the brides themselves hardly have a say in choosing the groom. It's their families who have the last word, ultimately choosing the bachelor that strikes a good balance between affordability and an impressive resume. Although the groom market of Bihar isn't nearly as popular as it was only a few decades ago, mainly because of more convenient options like online dating apps, it still draws thousands of bachelors, some of whom have traveled hundreds of kilometers in the hopes of being selected. Interestingly, India also has a bride market. In Haudati, brides are available for various prices depending on their qualifications and homemaking skills. And you know what? It's, everybody thinks there's romance, but they, you might think, well, to me, it's like a culture. I'm not saying I'm on board with this whole process, but it's almost like they take marriage more serious. In other words, who you're married to, besides the romance aspect and the attraction, it can make or break it. And it's almost like they don't trust, whether it's a man or a woman picking a bride or a groom. It's like if you're all caught up in the chemistry, you overlook problems until, then they may surface, and the sizzle is gone. So it's like, I guess this is the Indian method of, let's get you together with somebody that not what you want but what you need, that kind of deal. Anyway, let's go on to next story. It's out of Mysterious Universe. It's titled Men in Black, Women in Black, and Their Sinister Cars. Keep away from them all. If you've seen the Men in Black movies, you'll know they have super cool cars. The fact is, though, the real Men in Black and Women in Black have such notable cars too, as you'll find out. A very strange story was generously given to me by Linda Godfrey, Dogman Beast of Bray Road expert. Okay, let me see if who do we have here. Okay, it was during a break at a conference. I believe, but I'll confirm. The author of this piece is Nick Redfern. It was during a break at a conference on August 6, 2016, that Linda mentioned to me her odd story, a story that went as follows. It was around 2003, a sunny and warm day, and I happened to be out on Hospital Road, which is just off Bray Road and where a lot of sightings of dogmen have taken place. On that particular juncture of the road, there were a couple of cameramen and two colleagues of mine that were with me, and we were all being filmed for a TV show. It was a turn of one of my colleagues to be filmed. The other one and I were just standing at the side of the road, waiting and seeing what was going on, when this very large black sedan pulled up, and as the window came down, there was an older woman in the car, nobody that I knew. Linda continued, we looked at her as the window came down, and she said, in an accent that sounded kind of like a Russian accent, but could have been Eastern European. I'm not sure. Do you need any help? There was something about her mannerisms. It wasn't as if she was tentative or worried about anything. She just stated this in a really almost commanding way. My friend and I looked at each other and we just said, thank you, no, we're just filming. And it was like she didn't really understand what we just said because she said again, do you need any help? Can I help you? We said, no thanks, again. She still didn't drive away. She looked over at the cameraman who was filming the activity and she seemed a little reluctant to leave. But there wasn't any great reason she could think of to justify staying. So she finally turned and stepped on the gas kind of slowly, and that was it. Linda concluded, excuse me, Linda concluded, but it just struck me as so strange at the time. She was dressed in black, but it wasn't a formal business suit or anything like that. The car was black and the interior was kind of dark. I would estimate she was probably in her 60s and she had a deep voice. Her hair was grayish and pulled back. There was a bit of exoticness to her. It was such an odd thing. It was out of the ordinary and stuck in my mind. She didn't fit in with a local populace, put it that way. Now, let's have a look at some other car-based theories of the weird type. Now, onto another case. Dr. Joseph Allen Hynek, a well-renowned UFO authority who died in 1986, was provided with the details of a fantastically strange MIB encounter that occurred in a small Minnesota town in late 1975, and that falls firmly into just such a category. Ironically, no UFO was seen on this particular occasion, but the chief witness was harassed by the driver of a large black Cadillac on a particular stretch of highway, and who nearly forced the man into an adjacent ditch. The irate man quickly righted his vehicle and headed off in hot pursuit, only to see the black Cadillac lift into the air and, quite literally, disappear in the blink of an eye. That would stop me right there. Okay, let's see. Longtime UFO authority Jenny Randles, the author of The Truth Behind Men in Black, investigated an extremely similar case that occurred in Britain in August of 1981. In this particular incident, the witness, one Jim Wilson, had seen an unidentified but not overly fantastic light in the sky and was later blessed with a visit from a pair of suit-wearing characters flashing ID cards that demonstrated they came from the British Ministry of Defense. The two suggested to the man that he had merely viewed a Russian satellite, specifically Cosmos 408, and that he should forget all about the experience. That would indeed have been the end of things, were it not for the fact that the witness found to his concern that on a number of occasions, and shortly after the visit occurred, his home seemed to be under some form of surveillance by two men sitting in a black Jaguar car, which is a preferred mode of transport in most British men in black cases. The police were called, and across the course of several nights, stealthy checks of the immediate vicinity were made. After seeing the car parked outside the man's home on several occasions, and then managing to get a good look at his license plate, which the police were quickly able to confirm as being totally bogus, they carefully closed in with the intention of speaking with a pair of MIB and finding out the nature of their game. Unfortunately, they never got the chance to do so, as two uniformed officers approached the vehicle and prepared to knock on one of the windows. The black Jaguar melted away into nothingness. There was, not surprisingly, a deep reluctance on part of the officers to prepare any kind of written report alluding to such an event in the station logbook. Just like the men in black themselves, even in their vehicles, are seemingly able to perform disappearing acts of a near ghost-like nature. Even John Keel had his very own encounter with those elusive cars. In his book, The Cosmic Question, Keel said, "On a number of occasions I actually saw the phantom Cadillacs as advertised, complete with sinister-looking passengers in black suits. On Long Island, following the directions given me in an anonymous phone call, I pursued one of these cars down a dead-end road where it seemingly vanished into thin air, or there was no side roads or turnoffs." In, in Tim Beckley's book, The UFO Silencers, he stated, in 1967, in September 18, 1967, one of several students at Highlands University, Colorado, who had seen a UFO the night before, received a phone call threatening his life if he talked. He told this to a fellow student, who a week later, in company with a campus police officer, saw a blood-red object. 2 days later, he too received a phone call late at night telling him to forget what he had seen. The next day, a man in the street told him about the sighting, and even added information that confirmed some of my own research on Atlantis, and told him to keep his mouth shut. A few days later, a black car with tinted windows with a license plate showing nothing but 3X's nearly ran him over. Now, here's another case of the creepy car kind, this one from the long-defunct UFO mysteries. The time, October 1967. Mrs. B. of Mimosa, San Luis Valley, Colorado, who had made a painting of a crescent UFO that she had seen, was visited by a man who told her, "I cannot read, but mention any book in any library, and I will be able to tell you its contents." He went on to say that humans waste too much time and energy on food, when it could all be easily taken from the atmosphere. He insisted on buying her painting, so she set a high price, to which he replied that he had no money. He departed in a car which had an Arizona registration. Months later, police said they could not trace the plates. Pauline, who I interviewed in 2013, had a very strange encounter with a man in black back in October of 1973 when she was living in Pasadena, California. It's notable and probably relevant for me to reveal that a major UFO wave was going on at that time and all across the United States. While hiking in the California hills one Sunday morning, Pauline encountered a classic silver-colored flying saucer-style UFO, which, at first at least, was high in the sky. Suddenly it dropped to around 50 or 60 feet above her, hanging there in an odd, wobbling fashion. Amazed, Pauline could only stare at the silent craft as the silent craft bobbed around, like a boat on churning waters, and then shot away at a high speed. Pauline raced home and excitedly told her family of what had just taken place. They apparently weren't the only ones who knew what had occurred on that fateful morning in 1973. 3 days later, and after sunset, Pauline had a visitor, not a welcome one. I should stress it was a man in black, a skinny, almost emaciated old man, dressed in a black shabby suit, looking pale and ill, and wearing an old 1950s-style fedora hat. Pauline said that she felt her mind was briefly enslaved as the MIB near hypnotically asked her to invite him into her home. In a slight daze and to her eternal cost, she did exactly that. She retreated to the couch, stumbling slightly and feeling ice cold. The old man followed her and stood in the living room, looming over her as he warned her, in no uncertain terms, never to discuss her close encounter again, ever. The MIB then turned around and headed to the door. That exact moment, Pauline felt her mental faculties return to normal, and she raced after him, just as he exited the door and closed it behind him. Pauline threw the door open wide, only to find the old man in black gone. In his place, however, was something else. It was a large black dog with bright red eyes. It snapped and snarled in Pauline's direction, and in what was clearly a deeply malevolent, dangerous fashion. She stared in horror at the glowing-eyed monster prowled around the yard, clearly intent on adding to the malevolent atmosphere that was already firmly in place. And as out of nowhere, a large black Cadillac that looked decades old in design appeared and screeched to a halt outside of Pauline's home. It should be noted here that the MIB almost always drives such cars of that particular type, age, and color. Pauline watched, shocked and scared, as the back door on the driver's side opened and the fiendish black hound bounded across the front yard and leapt into the back of the Cadillac, which shot away at high speed. Today, Pauline, now a grandmother and someone who is fairly comfortable about sharing her bizarre experience, is of a firm opinion that the aged MIB and the red-eyed beast were one and the same. Beware of those black cars. Yeah. And this is going to be the last article. This is out of Animalian. It's titled, "A Giant Humanoid Figure Has Been Spotted Atop a Mountain in Canada." This very strange incident reportedly began earlier this year when Andrew Dawson and a friend were on their way to work in Alberta. Their usual routine took a strange turn when he noticed something unusual jutting out of the massive Whistler's Peak in the distance. During the shoot, Dawson asked his friend what he was seeing, and he replied with surprise, "It's a man, dude. A giant humanoid figure." Okay, yeah, there it is. While his interlocutor expressed understandable skepticism about what he had just been told, the anomaly captured in Dawson's video does appear to be a fairly large figure inexplicably standing on a mountain. When the footage was later posted on TikTok, the puzzling video garnered over 2 million views. Over the next few weeks, Dawson shared more details of this curious incident, which can be seen on video, including a return to the mountain where he revealed that the figure had mysteriously disappeared. As Dawson continued to investigate this sighting, he became increasingly suspicious that he had accidentally stumbled upon something he was not supposed to see. In one of the subsequent videos, he tried to visit the mountain again, but he was rudely refused by a certain official who informed him that this place was closed to the public. And that I have heard of. I have heard of people, especially like in national parks, and stuff like that, going back, having unusual experiences, and things like that, and either if let's say they find a park ranger, somebody to report what they saw, is like, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to. This part of the park is closed." Or they come back, and they find that that part of the park or wherever it was is closed or off limits. So this is not the only time that I've heard of something similar happening when it comes to follow-ups. So again, guys, I hope you liked this last segment of Eerie News. I will be back with you soon. Just to go over some new and interesting stuff, and God knows there's a lot of that. So till then, take care.